Mr. Freeman is engaging in a little bit of sophistry. First, he says that if you have enough money, you could hire a good enough attorney that you can get out of anything. And then he says that with Bao, that there's just not enough money you could throw at the situation to fix it. Which is it, Mr. Freeman? Can you buy your way out or can't you? Mr. Cochran was a good attorney, and there's a lot of demand for good attorneys, and good attorneys are expensive. The better the attorney, the more expensive the attorney is in general. And Mr. Cochran played a good game. He did it right. He won in voir dire, but then he maintained his lead by keeping enough question in the minds of the jurors to prevent them from concluding that OJ was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The police helped in that because the police were not quite as thorough as they should have been. They didn't dot their I's and cross their T's and follow the chains of evidence. They were sloppy. The difference between something like that, where there are holes to exploit and a good attorney will find those holes, and a case where, like, let's just say, for instance, Bao gets caught recording in the courtroom, well, that's contempt, straight up. The judge sees it, it's done. There is no way an attorney could have saved Bao. Because Bao, all the evidence was presented to the judge by Bao's own doing. So that's something you have to think about. And then, speaking of the difference between having Johnny Cochran on your side and being Bao and having no one on your side, Mr. Freeman then wants to show the difference, he says, by the outcomes with an attorney versus the outcomes without an attorney. However, he is going to be showing the difference in outcomes on different trials that deal with different charges, that have different facts, where the evidence was gathered by different agencies. And there are different finders of fact in each situation. In fact, there's state laws, Texas state laws versus federal laws. I mean, there's just too many differences. The only way you could have a real valuable comparison between them is if you have, like, let's say, the difference in the outcome between Brandon Cass and Mr. Freeman on the harassment charges on the same case in Dallas County. That would be a good comparison because Brandon Cass had an attorney, court appointed, I believe. And Brandon Cass has been done with this for, what, a month? Long time. 6 months suspended sentence or 6 months probation. Yeah, 6 months probation. Some tiny fine, and he's done. Wash his hands of it, and away he goes. Not hanging over his head. Mr. Freeman, without an attorney, using the tried and true tactics of Mark Stevens and Sovereign Citizens, is currently swinging in the wind. He's facing a potential sentence, and he's apparently gone out of his way to irritate the judge. So, yeah, we'll see how it turns out. I think they offered Mr. Freeman the deal, the plea. We'll see if he's smart enough to take it. But you're never going to be able to tell what you would have done, could have done, or should have done without an attorney. And Mr. Freeman's secondhand anecdotal story about his friend, whose attorney apparently told him that you just have to take abuses from prosecution, or else the prosecution will abuse you further. That's silly. You would literally have to be about half as bright as a can of tomatoes to believe that story. It doesn't work that way. Attorneys want abuses by the prosecutor because that kind of thing will get evidence suppressed. That kind of thing would be a valid motion to dismiss, especially if it's egregious. Speaking of motions to dismiss, Mr. Freeman says that his attorney should have had the federal case dismissed with a pretrial motion to dismiss. I don't think Mr. Freeman understands what it takes to get a pretrial motion to dismiss to be accepted by a judge. It has to be entirely based around the law, not fact-based. Or at least not fact-based as far as like contested facts. So like a valid motion to dismiss, or a motion to dismiss that would be likely to succeed, would be something like if the statute of limitations had passed. If the statute of limitations was 3 years and the prosecutors bring in a charge against you 5 years after you theoretically committed the crime, then it doesn't matter whether you committed the crime or not. It doesn't matter what kind of evidence the prosecutor has against you. The time limit's run. It's done. Unless the prosecutor can pull some magic tolling out of his ass, then it's done. And the judge is going to be like, yep, sorry. I mean, even if the judge convicted you, or if the jury convicted you and the judge sentenced you, it would be overturned because the statute of limitations had expired. So there's no point in wasting the resources on a trial. Double jeopardy, if you've already been tried and acquitted for it or something like that, and then they try to bring you to trial again, double jeopardy, that would be something. I mean, they're not saying whether you did or didn't do it. You're saying that I was already tried once for it, and they could look in the system and be like, yeah, he was tried for this before, and the jury acquitted him, so we can't try him again. Jeopardy had attached. This is going to be double jeopardy. And Alex Trebek is not pleased. He already tried the speedy trial, motion to dismiss for a speedy trial. That one's harder to get. There's a lot more balancing and looking at factors. It's possible, though. Is that what I want to talk about? I think that's what I wanted to talk. Oh, one other thing. It sounds like Mr. Freeman wanted his attorney to just do the legwork, and Mr. Freeman would be deciding strategy. I hope that isn't the case. Mr. Freeman doesn't understand the law well enough to understand strategy, and he doesn't understand the law well enough to understand why his anecdote about his friend who was screwed over by lawyers, he doesn't understand enough about the law to understand why that is such a ridiculous story. So I fervently hope that Mr. Freeman is not actually directing the strategy, and that he's allowing his attorney to do what his attorney is getting paid to do. I still think it was a mistake for him to replace his attorney of record with the Mr. Barr. But Mr. Freeman protests that he didn't know he had an attorney. It was an attorney that was assigned to him, and he didn't know. I believe it. Meaning I don't. Then we got this. Monkey's going out to cop watch. He runs into a bunch of citizens who are less than enthusiastic about his treatment of the police. And the camera kind of cuts out when a big old broad runs up and lays him on his butt. This gal right here has enough of Monkey's mug, and she lays him out. And then he gets up with this look on his face. Oh, so priceless. What happened? What happened? And he shows us, I don't know if I'll ever find it, but he shows us his elbows got scraped. I told you Auditors are pissing the public off. You're not making friends. You're entertaining the diehards in the community at the same time as you are alienating literally everybody else. Now, I had someone in my comments, DFW, I believe, saying that auditors aren't, he said, holding the government accountable. I believe that in the video that he's referencing, my statement was more that they would be pressing against the edges, pressing against the boundaries, and then sooner or later, that as the government naturally made stricter and stricter laws, it would soon get to the point where that magical arrest would happen. Not that the citizens would like the auditor, although there are some auditors who do it right and who don't piss the public off in general. But I said sooner or later that magical arrest would happen, where the court would say the government has pushed it too far and would redefine that line for the First Amendment. And that's the way that auditors hold the government accountable, in my estimation. Because, filming a secretary or something it doesn't hold the government accountable. Irritating police officers doesn't hold the government accountable. Going into a police station and demanding that a police officer answer your questions and then shouting about how you have a loaded pistol on your hip doesn't hold the police accountable. But getting arrested and fighting it and getting the government to reaffirm, the judicial branch to reaffirm where the boundaries of the First Amendment are, that does hold the government accountable. But the coup de grace, the cherry on top, the icing on the cake, was that our good friend Monkey was going to wait around for the police to show up because he wants to file charges for assault and battery. Funny how that happens. Funny how all of a sudden the police are important. The police are on your side. The police are your best friends. You can't wait for them to show up. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy? Anyway, that was your bit of irony for the night. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.